The smell of jet fuel and the roar of engines filled the air as I stood on the tarmac, military duffel slung over my shoulder. This would be my third deployment in 5 years, but something felt different this time. The goodbye kiss seemed colder, her embrace less sincere. I brushed it off as the stress of another long separation. 15 months is an eternity when you're oceans apart. We had been married for 7 years, high school sweethearts who tied the knot before my first deployment. The military life was tough on relationships, I knew that, but we had promised to weather any storm together. Standing there in my uniform, I thought we were still on the same page. The first 2 months overseas went smoothly. Video calls whenever possible, care packages arriving regularly, and long emails about our plans for when I returned. Then, gradually, things began to change. The calls became shorter, the packages stopped, and her messages grew vague and distant. I told myself it was just the distance taking its toll, something we had overcome before. Then came the message that shattered everything. Not from her, but from a fellow soldier whose wife ran in the same social circles back home. He approached me after a mission, face grim with the burden of what he needed to say. His wife had accidentally seen my spouse at a lawyer's office, discussing divorce proceedings. She wanted everything finalized before I returned home. I stood frozen in the barracks, the desert heat suddenly unable to touch the coldness spreading through my chest. The betrayal wasn't just in the divorce, it was in the secrecy, the planning, the calculation. She wanted to ambush me when I stepped off the plane, exhausted and vulnerable after serving my country. That night, I stared at the ceiling of my bunk, surrounded by soldiers who had become my family, wondering how the person I trusted most could become a stranger. I sent her a direct message. I know about the divorce papers. Why couldn't you tell me to my face? No response came for 3 days. When she finally replied, the message was clinical and detached. I've changed. This isn't working anymore. I'll meet you at the airport when you return, and we can discuss the terms civilly. No explanation for the betrayal, no apology for the ambush she had planned. Just cold finality from the woman who once promised forever. The following weeks were a blur of missions and paperwork by day, and sleepless planning by night. If she wanted to surprise me with divorce papers at the airport, perhaps she deserved a surprise of her own. I reached out to my father, a retired military officer who understood both duty and loyalty. Without hesitation, he agreed to help. I contacted our joint bank and discovered something even more disturbing. Large transfers had been made to an account I didn't recognize, beginning just days after my deployment. The timing wasn't coincidental. She had been planning this from the moment I left, perhaps even before. Financial records showed regular withdrawals at restaurants and hotels I'd never visited, charges for gifts I'd never received. The betrayal went deeper than I'd initially thought. Through discreet conversations with trusted friends back home, I learned she had been seen around town with someone I considered a friend, someone who had sat at our dinner table and raised glasses to my safe return. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture I could barely stand to look at. My commanding officer noticed the change in me, the hollow look, the mechanical performance of duties. After hearing a simplified version of my situation, he did something unexpected. He approved a short leave, allowing me to return home 3 weeks earlier than scheduled. "Handle your business, soldier," he said, with a knowing look that spoke volumes. "Just be back here when your actual deployment ends." As the military transport lifted off, carrying me back towards home and heartbreak, I felt strangely calm. The ambush would now be mine, not hers. The airport welcome she planned would happen, but not on her terms. Not anymore. The military transport touched down on American soil with a jolt that matched the unsteady beating of my heart. I was home 3 weeks early, and no one except my father and 2 trusted friends knew about my return. The secrecy felt foreign to me. I had always been direct, honest to a fault, but this situation demanded a different approach. My father waited in his weathered pickup at the private airfield, his face a mixture of concern and controlled anger. He embraced me with the strength that had carried our family through previous hardships. "The guest room is ready," he said simply. "No questions, no advice, just unconditional support." That night, we sat on his back porch, drinking bourbon in silence as crickets provided the only conversation needed. The following morning, I began executing the plan we had carefully crafted. First stop, the bank. I sat across from a manager who reviewed our joint accounts with growing discomfort. The withdrawals were even more substantial than I had initially discovered. Nearly 60% of our savings gone over 3 months. I transferred my military pay to a new, separate account, leaving enough in the joint account to avoid arousing suspicion. The manager, whose brother had served 2 tours overseas, expedited everything without unnecessary questions. Next was the visit to our home. The modest 3-bedroom we had purchased 2 years earlier with dreams of filling it with children someday. I used my key to enter silently, standing in the foyer that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Evidence of another presence was everywhere. Unfamiliar cologne on the bathroom counter, dress shirts not my size in the laundry basket, 2 wine glasses in the sink. Our wedding photo had been removed from the mantel, replaced by a travel souvenir I'd never seen. I moved through the rooms methodically, collecting only what mattered most: military commendations, family heirlooms, the handwritten letters from my grandfather who had served in Vietnam. Everything else, furniture, electronics, the trappings of our shared life, could be divided later through legal channels. I wasn't there to empty the house. I was there to reclaim pieces of my identity. In the home office, I discovered documents carelessly left in the printer tray, emails between her and her lawyer discussing what they called the airport strategy. They had timed everything to coincide with my expected return date. The lawyer advised presenting the papers publicly to minimize potential conflict and establish control of the narrative. The calculated coldness of it made my stomach turn. As I prepared to leave, a text message alert broke the silence. A childhood friend who lived in our neighborhood wanted to meet urgently. Over coffee at a diner far from familiar haunts, he revealed the uncomfortable truth. The affair had been going on for at least a year, predating my deployment. The betrayal had roots much deeper than I had imagined, stretching back through moments I had once considered happy. The following days passed in a blur of legal consultations and quiet preparations. My military-appointed attorney reviewed the financial records with growing indignation, documenting each questionable transaction for the coming proceedings. "This won't stand in court," he assured me, organizing evidence of what could legally be considered marital asset dissipation. Throughout this time, I maintained radio silence with her. She sent occasional texts about my return flight information, asking which terminal I would arrive at, whether I needed a ride home. Each message maintained the facade that everything was normal, that she wasn't planning to end our marriage the moment I stepped off the plane. I answered minimally, confirming the original arrival date and time, playing along with her charade. My father, seeing the toll this took, reminded me of something important. "This isn't who you are. Don't let this situation make you bitter. Handle it with the same honor you show in uniform." His words anchored me as the plan took its final shape. The night before her planned airport welcome, I sat with my small circle of confidants: my father, 2 fellow veterans who had become brothers to me, and my attorney. We reviewed everything one last time. The documentation was in order, the witnesses were prepared, and the timing was set. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation I never wanted but now recognized as necessary. As I laid awake that night, I felt no joy in what was to come, no satisfaction in the reversal of her ambush. There was only a heavy resignation and the first quiet stirrings of something unexpected: relief. Whatever happened at that airport terminal tomorrow, it would be the beginning of an ending that had been written long before I knew the story had changed. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as I rose from my father's guest bed. Today was supposed to be my official homecoming. The day circled on calendars, the day she had chosen for her ambush. Checking my phone, I found 2 messages from her confirming she would be at the airport at 2:30 p.m. to welcome me home. The casual deception in her words made my chest tighten. Breakfast with my father was quiet but strengthening. He had always taught me that character reveals itself not in easy moments, but in painful ones. "Remember who you are," he said, passing me a cup of coffee. "Not just a soldier, not just a husband, a man who stands on principle." His words steadied my resolve as the hours ticked by. At noon, we set our plan in motion. My 2 closest friends, veterans who understood loyalty in ways civilians rarely could, arrived at my father's house. They had taken personal days from work without hesitation when they heard what was happening. One brought the final paperwork from my attorney, the other a garment bag containing my dress uniform. If this confrontation was inevitable, I would face it with the same discipline and dignity I brought to my service. As I dressed in the crisp uniform that represented so much of my identity, I thought about the last 3 weeks of my covert return. I had used this time not just for legal preparations, but for something more important: emotional fortification. Sessions with a military counselor had helped me process the betrayal without letting it define me. Conversations with other service members who had endured similar situations provided perspective and pathways forward. The drive to the airport was silent, each of us lost in thought. My father handled the wheel with the same steady hands that had taught me to shoot, to fish, to become the man I am. We arrived 90 minutes before her expected appearance, giving us time to move through security and position ourselves near the arrival gate listed on my original flight information, the gate where she intended to serve me divorce papers amid the reunion crowds. The terminal buzzed with the energy of families awaiting loved ones, children clutching welcome signs, couples scanning the arrivals bored with anticipation. The normalcy of it all created a surreal backdrop for what was about to unfold. We found seats with a clear view of the main entrance and settled in to wait. At precisely 2:05 p.m., she appeared at the terminal entrance. My breath caught, not from lingering affection, but from the jarring dissonance of seeing someone so familiar, yet now so strange. She wasn't alone. The man walking beside her, carrying what appeared to be a leather portfolio, was unmistakable, my former friend, now apparently her confidant in betrayal. They moved with the uncomfortable body language of people trying to appear casual while preparing for something momentous. My father tensed beside me, his weathered hand gripping the armrest. "Stay focused," he murmured, a reminder pulled from countless hunting trips and life lessons. My friends positioned themselves casually nearby, close enough to witness, but not so close as to immediately reveal our connection. For 20 minutes, we observed them from across the terminal. They checked the arrival board repeatedly, consulted their phones, scanned the crowds. They had no idea I was already there, watching their every nervous gesture, every whispered consultation. The portfolio changed hands several times, its contents, what I presumed to be divorce papers, apparently worth reviewing one last time before presentation. At 2:27 p.m., 3 minutes before my scheduled arrival, I nodded to my companions. It was time. My father and friends moved to predetermined positions while I approached from an angle that kept my back to them initially. I walked with the measured pace that had carried me through combat zones, each step deliberate and grounded in purpose rather than anger. I positioned myself directly behind them as they stared anxiously at the gate. The arrivals board showed my flight had landed, passengers beginning to emerge from the jetway. The portfolio opened between them, papers shuffled with nervous energy. I heard her rehearsing what sounded like a practice speech, something about hoping we could handle this maturely. "Looking for someone?" I asked, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest. They turned simultaneously, the color draining from both their faces in perfect synchronization. The portfolio tumbled from his hands, papers scattering across the terminal floor, divorce documents, financial statements, property division proposals. Evidence of meticulous planning now creating a paper trail at our feet. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, no words emerging. He stepped backward, instinctively distancing himself as recognition dawned in the eyes of nearby travelers. My father and friends moved forward, completing our circle, witnesses to a moment none of us had ever imagined would be part of our lives. In the stunned silence that followed, I realized something important. I felt no satisfaction in their shock, no pleasure in turning their ambush against them. What I felt instead was something unexpected and powerful, the first real moment of closure. The terminal seemed to fall silent around us, though logically I knew the airport continued its bustling rhythm. Her face cycled through expressions, shock, embarrassment, anger, calculation, before settling on something resembling composure. His reaction was less controlled, eyes darting between exits as if mapping escape routes. "You're early," she finally managed, her voice barely audible above the terminal announcements. The absurdity of her statement hung in the air between us. "And you're predictable," I replied evenly, gesturing to the scattered papers that several bystanders were now openly staring at. "Did you really think ambushing me after 15 months of service was the honorable way to end our marriage?" She flinched at the word honorable, as if the concept was suddenly foreign in the context of our relationship. Her companion finally found his voice, stepping forward with rehearsed authority that crumbled under the stern gaze of my father and friends. "This is between the two of you. I'm just here for moral support," he claimed, the lie transparent as airport glass. His presence, the portfolio in his hands, The intimate way he had been leaning toward her moments before told a different story entirely. An older couple nearby had stopped to watch, the man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap. He caught my eye, offering a slight nod of solidarity that spoke volumes. Others were noticing too: the uniform, the confrontation, the scattered legal documents. This public setting, chosen specifically to minimize my reaction, was now becoming an audience to her exposed deception. Moral support? I echoed, maintaining deliberate calm. Is that what you call emptying joint accounts while I was deployed? Is that what you call moving into my house before I even returned from serving our country? Each question landed with precision, not as accusations, but as established facts we all knew to be true. Her composure began to crack. We didn't, she stammered. But the financial records my attorney had prepared told a different story. I removed a folder from inside my uniform jacket and held it up. 3 weeks ago, I received approval for emergency leave after learning about your plans. That gave me time to discover exactly what you've been doing since I deployed. The transfers from our savings. The credit cards opened in my name. The attempt to refinance our house without proper power of attorney. I listed each betrayal without emotion, as if reading a mission report. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the uniform and the drama unfolding. Airport security hovered nearby, uncertain whether intervention was necessary. My father stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder, not to restrain me, but to remind me of his presence, his support. We should discuss this privately, she insisted, attempting to gather the scattered papers, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. This isn't the place. You chose this place. I reminded her, voice level but carrying enough for those nearby to hear. You selected this public terminal to serve me divorce papers, thinking my military discipline would prevent any reaction. You counted on my exhaustion and shock to give you the upper hand. Her companion shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in studying the terminal floor. The portfolio he had been clutching so confidently now lay forgotten amid scattered documents. I have one question, I continued, looking directly at her for what I knew might be the last meaningful exchange between us. Was any of it real? Or was I just convenient until something better came along? The question hung between us, heavier than any rucksack I'd carried through desert heat. For a moment, something genuine flickered across her face. Regret, perhaps, though not for the betrayal itself, but for its clumsy execution. It was real, she said quietly, until it wasn't. For words that summarized 7 years of what I had thought was building a life together. For words that confirmed what I needed to know. There was nothing here worth fighting for, no foundation to rebuild upon. I nodded once, then reached into my pocket and retrieved my own envelope. My attorney has prepared counterfilings to your divorce petition. Unlike yours, mine accounts for the financial irregularities and state laws regarding infidelity during military deployment. I extended the envelope, not with anger, but with finality. You'll find everything fair, despite circumstances that would justify otherwise. She took the envelope with trembling fingers, all pretense of control now evaporated. Her companion finally found his courage, stepping forward with indignation that seemed grotesquely misplaced. You had no right to go behind her back like this, he began, but fell silent when my father cleared his throat. Son, my father said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of his 30 years of military service. I suggest you consider very carefully whether you want to lecture anyone about going behind backs. The gathered crowd did nothing to hide their reactions. Several nodded in agreement. Others murmured approval. The Vietnam veteran removed his cap in a gesture of respect that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Airport security finally approached, asking if everything was all right. I assured them the situation was under control. As they dispersed the curious onlookers, I turned back to face what remained of my marriage. The keys to the house are in the envelope, I said. I've removed my personal belongings. The rest we can divide through proper channels. I stepped back, creating physical distance that merely reflected the emotional chasm already between us. My deployment officially ends in 3 weeks. I'll be returning to base tomorrow to complete my service honorably, the same way I've conducted every other aspect of my life. With that, I turned and walked away, my father and friends falling in step beside me. Behind us, I heard her call my name once, her voice carrying a question I no longer needed to answer. The aftermath of the airport confrontation rippled outward like shock waves from an explosion. By evening, My phone buzzed constantly with messages from mutual friends, former colleagues, and extended family. Word had spread rapidly through our social circles, aided by the public nature of our encounter and several airport witnesses who recognized us from the community. I spent that night at my father's house, sitting on the back porch where I had played as a child, where I had told him I wanted to enlist, where we had toasted my commission. The familiar creaking of the porch swing provided comfort no words could match. "You handled yourself with dignity," he said simply, pouring another finger of bourbon into my glass. "Your mother would have been proud." The mention of my mother, gone 7 years now, brought the first tears I had allowed myself since this ordeal began. The following morning brought expected complications. She had tried to access our remaining joint accounts overnight, only to discover the preventative measures my attorney had implemented. Her response was a barrage of text messages alternating between accusations and appeals to sentimentality. I forwarded them to my attorney without responding directly, a boundary that felt necessary for my mental well-being. Her parents called next. We had always been close. I had helped her father rebuild his deck last spring before my deployment, had driven her mother to medical appointments when arthritis made driving difficult. Their voices carried confusion and sorrow rather than anger. They didn't ask for explanations or take sides, simply expressed their continuing affection regardless of what happened between their daughter and me. Their decency made the situation both easier and harder to bear. By midday, my former friend, her new companion, made his predictable overture. His message struck a tone of wounded innocence, claiming things had just happened while I was away, that neither of them had intended to hurt me. The practiced excuses rang hollow against the evidence of their meticulous planning. This calculated betrayal had unfolded over months, possibly longer. I deleted his message without responding, his friendship now categorized with other casualties of war, things once valuable, now irretrievably lost. My commanding officer called that afternoon, having heard about the situation through military channels. His concern was professional but genuine, ensuring I was mentally fit to return to base and complete my service. "The unit has your back," he assured me, his gruff voice softening slightly. "Whatever you need." The brotherhood of service sometimes understood loyalty better than family. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at my father's door, her cousin, who had been like a sister to me during our marriage. She came not as a spy or messenger, but as someone caught between loyalties and seeking truth. Over coffee at the kitchen table, she revealed the fuller picture of what had transpired during my absence. The affair had indeed predated my deployment, beginning at a time when our marriage had seemed most stable. Weekends I spent at required training had become their opportunities. My extended absence overseas merely provided the convenient timeline for formalizing what they had already begun. More disturbingly, she confirmed my suspicions about financial maneuvers designed to disadvantage me before I discovered the betrayal. Consultation with attorneys specializing in military divorces, research into how deployment affected property division in our state. What struck me most in her account was not the deception itself, but the calculation behind it. The airport plan had been discussed openly at family gatherings I would have attended had I not been serving overseas. Some had found it distasteful, but remained silent out of misplaced loyalty. Others had actively encouraged it, viewing marriage as a strategic arrangement rather than a sacred commitment. After she left, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded sports trophies and military recruiting posters that had inspired my career path. The room felt like a time capsule of simplicity, preserving versions of myself untouched by this betrayal. I reviewed the documentation my attorney had prepared, evidence of financial misconduct, time-stamped records of account transfers, credit applications made in my name while I was deployed. The paper trail told a story of methodical planning that contradicted every tearful text message she had sent since our confrontation. The following morning, my father drove me to the base where I would complete the final weeks of my deployment status. The familiar gates and checkpoints represented a return to order and clarity after the chaos of fractured civilian loyalties. As we approached the security checkpoint, he pulled the truck to the side of the road and turned to face me. "When I came back from my second tour," he said, eyes fixed on the base entrance, "your mother was waiting right there, 7 months pregnant with you, holding a sign too heavy for her to lift properly. She had driven 3 hours alone because she couldn't wait to see me." He paused, the memory playing across his weathered face. Not everyone gets that kind of loyalty, but those who don't deserve the chance to find it elsewhere. His words stayed with me as I checked in with my unit, resumed my duties, and began the structured routine that had anchored me through multiple deployments. Military life offered what I needed most now: clear expectations, defined boundaries, and a community that understood both sacrifice and honor. Within the structured environment of the base, I found space to process my emotions without drowning in them. Daily PT pushed my body to productive exhaustion. Counseling sessions with the military chaplain provided perspective without platitudes. Fellow service members shared similar stories without awkward pity, treating relationship casualties as just another form of combat experience, painful but survivable. 3 days after my return to base, my attorney called with unexpectedly positive news. The documented financial misconduct during my deployment had triggered special provisions under state law protecting deployed service members. Her attempts to transfer assets had not only failed, but had significantly strengthened my position in the divorce proceedings. The court had frozen remaining joint assets pending resolution and expedited the hearing timeline. That night, for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I slept without waking, the path forward finally visible through the fog of deception and disillusionment. 6 months have passed since that day at the airport. The seasons have changed, leaves falling and snow melting in the cycle that continues regardless of human drama. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago, the proceedings expedited by clear evidence, and her eventual decision not to contest the financial misconduct claims. What could have been a prolonged battle became a swift resolution, allowing both of us to move forward separately. The house was sold, assets divided according to law rather than emotion. My military benefits remained protected, her attempts to claim portions of my pension thwarted by regulations designed specifically for situations like mine. The justice in this outcome brought no joy, only closure. The final period at the end of a chapter one never expected to write. My unit deployed again last month. I stood on the same tarmac, breathed the same jet fuel air, carried a similar duffel over my shoulder. But everything else had changed. The weight of betrayal no longer accompanied my standard gear. The hypervigilance that had followed me home from combat zones no longer extended to my personal relationships. I had learned to distinguish between necessary tactical awareness and paralyzing suspicion. 2 weeks into this new deployment, I received an email from her. The timestamp showed it was sent at 2 a.m., words possibly fueled by late-night reflection or something stronger. She wrote of regrets, not about ending the marriage, but about the method she had chosen. The airport plan now seemed childish and cruel to her in retrospect. She had lost friends over it, strained family relationships, damaged her professional reputation in our community. The man she had chosen over our marriage had eventually left her for someone else, an irony not lost on either of us. I read her message twice, then closed my laptop without responding. Not from anger or vindictiveness, but from recognition that no response was necessary. We had nothing left to say that mattered. The apology, if that's what it was, changed nothing and healed nothing. It served her need for absolution rather than my need for closure, which I had already found elsewhere. That closure came not from the legal victory or her belated acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but from the community that rallied around me during the darkest days. Fellow service members who shared similar stories. Neighbors who chose sides based on character rather than convenience. The older couple from the airport, the Vietnam veteran and his wife, who tracked me down through community connections to invite me to their weekly veterans breakfast group. Most significantly, closure came from within. The betrayal had initially shaken my foundation, making me question my judgment and worth. The calculated nature of the deception, planned while I served my country, had struck at core beliefs about loyalty and honor. But through military counseling and the steady support of my father, I gradually recognized that her actions reflected her character, not mine. The military chaplain who counseled me through those early months had offered perspective that initially seemed impossible to accept. Sometimes the worst betrayals create the clearest paths forward. At the time, the words had felt like empty comfort. Now, halfway across the world on my 4th deployment, I understood their truth. The path forward was indeed clearer without the fog of deception. Last week, a new lieutenant joined our unit, recently commissioned and eager to prove himself. During night watch, he confided his worries about the girlfriend he left behind, his fears about relationships surviving deployment. The questions were painfully familiar, concerns I had once carried during quieter watches in similar settings. I could have shared my story as a cautionary tale, reinforced his anxiety with confirmation that his worst fears sometimes materialize. Instead, I found myself offering different wisdom, drawn not from my betrayal but from what followed it. Trust is a choice we make over and over, not a guarantee we're entitled to. But without that choice, nothing worthwhile is possible. My father visits the base whenever I have leave, bringing news from home and the steady presence that has anchored me through every storm. During his last visit, he mentioned running into her at the grocery store, their first encounter since the divorce. She looked unhappy, he said simply, without satisfaction or judgment. Some people never figure out that happiness comes from who you are, not who you're with. The wisdom in his observation resonated beyond my particular situation. Throughout my military career, I've witnessed marriages that thrive despite separation and hardship, bonds strengthened by shared commitment to something larger than immediate gratification. I've also seen relationships that collapsed under far less pressure than mine endured, the foundations too shallow to support the weight of service demands. Yesterday, I received a care package from an unexpected source, her parents. Despite the divorce, they had maintained contact, sending holiday cards and occasional messages. This package contained homemade cookies, a handwritten note expressing continued affection, and a service medal that had belonged to her grandfather. "We think he would want you to have this," they wrote. "Loyalty matters to our family, even when the example hasn't been consistent." Their gesture reinforced something I've come to believe through this experience. Family isn't always defined by legal documents or shared names. Sometimes it's found in the people who choose to stand beside you when they could easily walk away. My father maintaining silent vigil during legal proceedings, military brothers offering couches and conversation during the hardest nights, colleagues covering shifts when focus proved impossible. Tonight, as I write this from a forward operating base thousands of miles from what I once called home, I feel neither bitter nor broken. The betrayal that once defined my every waking thought has been reduced to what it truly is, one chapter in a much longer story, a painful passage, but not the conclusion. The airport confrontation she planned was meant to be an ending on her terms. The airport confrontation that actually occurred became a beginning on mine. Not a beginning I would have chosen, but one that forced growth in directions I might otherwise have avoided. The resilience required by military service prepared me for personal battles I never anticipated fighting. The discipline that carried me through combat zones sustained me through courtrooms and silent nights. Tomorrow brings another mission, another opportunity to fulfill the obligations I've chosen and honor the commitments I've made. The ring no longer circles my finger, but the principles it represented still guide my actions. Some promises cannot be kept by one person alone, but integrity remains entirely within individual control. That knowledge, more than any legal resolution or emotional closure, represents the true outcome of this unexpected journey.